My fiancée said she'd only marry me if I leveled up, so I upgraded. By leaving her and dating her boss, I'm a 27-year-old guy, and for most of my life, I believed loyalty was the foundation of every relationship. I've always been the type 2 over-believer when it came to people I cared about, and with Chloe, it was no different. She's stunning, ambitious, and somehow effortlessly magnetic. Everyone notices her the second she walks into a room. I worked double shifts, stayed late at the office, and even sacrificed nights out with friends just to make sure I could afford the kind of life she seemed to expect. Gifts, dinners at fancy places, weekend trips. I thought every little thing would prove to her that I was serious, that I was worthy. Chloe, on the other hand, never hid her background. Her family subtly flaunted wealth and status, dropping hints about the schools they went to, the vacations they took, and the people they knew. She'd joke sometimes, just casually. You know, a few of my friends are dating really high-level guys now. At first, I laughed it off, but a tiny knot of doubt formed in my stomach. Am I enough for her? Do I measure up to the kind of life she's used to? I tried to brush it aside, telling myself love meant sacrifice, and I was willing to give everything I had. Every conversation, every dinner, every gift I prepared felt like a test I had to pass. I would lie awake thinking about how I could improve my career, my apartment, even the way I dressed, anything to reach the level Chloe seemed to want. I felt proud of myself, genuinely believing that my loyalty, hard work, and emotional investment would secure our future together. There was a quiet satisfaction in thinking, I'm doing the right thing. I'm giving everything I can, but beneath that pride, there was a flicker of unease I couldn't fully ignore. Chloe's comments about her friends, her subtle comparisons, the way she sometimes looked at other men during parties, all of it planted seeds I didn't want to admit were there. I had no idea that her expectations weren't just high, were a moving target, one that would push me further than I ever imagined. I went to bed that night, exhausted from work and the pressure I had voluntarily shouldered. Thinking I was proving myself, thinking love was enough. Unaware that I was stepping onto a path where loyalty alone wouldn't save me, I didn't realize it at the time, but Chloe had a way of turning love into a constant performance review. It started with little suggestions. You should try networking more. Or that jacket is nice, but maybe something sharper would look better on you. I nodded, smiled, and tried to take it as helpful advice. But inside, I felt the weight of her words like tiny hammers hitting at my confidence. Every dinner with her family, every outing with her friends, seemed like a subtle evaluation. She'd casually remark on her friends' boyfriends, highlighting their salaries, their cars, even how smoothly they could carry a conversation at a gala. And I kept thinking, okay, I'll do this. I'll get there. I'll prove I'm worth her. So I did. I worked longer hours, skipping nights out, and even family events, just to push myself further. I joined networking events I had no interest in, dressed in clothes that felt foreign, and even tried mimicking the social habits of guys she seemed to admire. Chloe noticed. Of course, she'd nod approvingly sometimes, but her praise was fleeting, always paired with a subtle critique. That's nice, but wouldn't it be cooler if you had X, or imagine if you could pull this off like so? Every compliment came with an invisible scoreboard, and I kept adding points, hoping one day it would be enough. I even started questioning myself constantly. Was my job good enough? My apartment fancy enough? Did I talk the right way in front of her friends? I wanted her approval so badly that I ignored the gnawing anxiety building inside me. Sometimes at night, I'd replay our conversations, analyzing every word, every glance, trying to decode the unspoken expectations. And yet, despite all the effort, Chloe remained just out of reach emotionally. Her charisma was effortless. She could smile and charm everyone in the room, including me, while silently reminding me of how far I still had to go. There was a tension in the air I couldn't name, a quiet test I was constantly failing in my own mind. I went to sleep that night, exhausted but thinking, I'm doing everything I can. If love isn't enough, then maybe I'm just not trying hard enough. But the truth was, Chloe's standards were never about love. They were a game I hadn't even realized I'd agreed to play. I started noticing things that didn't sit right, but I kept rationalizing them. Chloe would text late into the night and jump if I casually asked who she was talking to. It's nothing, she'd say, laughing it off, like I was being paranoid. But it wasn't just the text sit, was the way she subtly shifted whenever I brought up our plans, our future, or even something as small as weekends together. She started slipping in comments that made me feel like I was lucky just to be tolerated. Some guys just don't get it, you know? Or you're trying, but, well, you know. Every time, I felt a sting. But I convinced myself it was just part of pushing each other to be better. Her family didn't make it easier. During dinners, Chloe's parents would casually drop mentions of other wealthy, ambitious men they admired, always comparing them indirectly to me. Her siblings would joke about how fun it must be to date a guy who's still catching up. I smiled, laughed along, but inside, my chest tightened. I wondered if they saw me the way Chloe did, or worse, if they saw me as someone beneath her. There were moments when she borrowed my work contacts, my ideas, or even my connections to her advantage, and would casually take credit, saying, "I know how to make things happen, thanks to you." I felt my stomach twist, but I ignored it. I told myself love meant patience, that these were small compromises for the sake of our future. The subtle manipulations piled up, snide remarks, masked as jokes, comparisons disguised as advice, and hints of Chloe's growing attraction to people with more status or influence. I wanted to see the best in her, to trust that my loyalty and effort would eventually make everything right. But at night, lying in bed, I'd feel uneasy. A knot of doubt had started forming in my stomach, growing heavier each day. Something about Chloe's perfection, her charm, and the way she effortlessly commanded attention was starting to feel like a test I could never really pass, and maybe wasn't supposed to. The day Chloe dropped the ultimatum, I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "I love you, but I can't marry you unless you're on my level, socially, professionally, financially. I need someone who matches the life I want." It wasn't a suggestion or a subtle hint anymore. It was a clear, sharp line drawn in the sand. I remember the sting in my chest, the sudden tightness in my throat, and the panic that raced through my veins. I wanted to argue, to explain how much effort I'd already put in, but the words felt hollow, even to me. Instead, I swallowed it, nodded, and promised to do everything I could to get there. From that day, every waking moment became a calculation. I pushed myself harder at work, stayed late into the night, and poured money I didn't have into upgrading my life, new clothes, better networking, classes I barely had time to attend. Chloe noticed, of course. "Wow, that's better," she said one evening, tilting her head with a faint smile. But there was always that invisible bar she was holding above my head. Every compliment carried a hidden critique. I started feeling like I was living in two worlds, one where I loved Chloe and wanted to make her happy, and one where I had to constantly measure myself against an invisible standard. Her friends' boyfriends became benchmarks. Her family's casual remarks became weights, and every interaction with Chloe felt like a test I couldn't fully prepare for. I was exhausted, emotionally drained, and yet I kept convincing myself that proving my worth was just part of love. At night, lying on the edge of my bed, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if love should ever feel like a constant evaluation. I wondered if there was a point where trying wasn't enough, if that point was already here. The seed of doubt was planted, but I buried it under layers of determination. Unaware that the real challenge wasn't the ultimatum itself, it was Chloe's hidden agenda. I never expected to see it with my own eyes, but one evening, at a small company event Chloe invited me to, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Chloe was leaning close to her boss, Michael, laughing at a joke I couldn't hear, her hand brushing against his arm in a way that felt deliberate. At first, I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just tired and overthinking, but then my phone buzzed with a notification message from someone in her circle showing screenshots of texts between her and Michael. She'd been talking about me behind my back, calling me adorable but inadequate, bragging about how close she was getting to her boss, and even making plans that excluded me. The betrayal hit like a punch I couldn't brace for. Every late night of effort, every dollar spent, every compromise I'd made, suddenly it felt meaningless. I sat there frozen, the buzz of the party around me fading into a dull hum as I tried to process it. The Chloe I thought I knew, the woman I was sacrificing so much for, had been playing a different game entirely. She didn't want me to level up. She wanted to find someone who was already at her level. I didn't confront her immediately. I couldn't. My mind was spinning with anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. I felt trapped in a reality I hadn't signed up for. Watching the woman I loved flirt with the man I'd unknowingly been competing against. My chest ached with the knowledge that all my efforts, all my sacrifices, had been in vain, used as a stepping stone for her ambitions. Lying awake in my apartment, I replayed every interaction, every subtle jab, every comment she had made. It all clicked into place, the comparisons, the critiques, the emotional manipulations. Chloe hadn't been pushing me to grow for our relationship. She'd been manipulating me to make herself feel superior, while her attention was already elsewhere. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't dared consider before. Maybe the only way I could reclaim my dignity was to stop playing by her rules entirely. The days after that revelation were the darkest I've ever experienced. I tried talking to Chloe, carefully, cautiously, hoping for an explanation or at least a shred of honesty. "You're overreacting," she said, rolling her eyes, brushing off the screenshots I couldn't stop staring at. Her family sided with her subtly, dropping comments that made me feel like I was losing my mind. "You always take things too seriously, and maybe you just don't understand ambition." Every conversation became a minefield. I felt humiliated, trapped, and completely powerless. My friends noticed my mood shifting, but I couldn't tell them the whole truth without exposing Chloe's manipulations and risking even more embarrassment. I went to work mechanically, numbed by the betrayal, unable to focus, unable to process what I had believed about love versus what was real. Nights where worse sleep eluded me as I replayed every flirt, every casual remark, every betrayal in slow, painful detail. The person I thought I was building a life with was actively undermining me, and for a moment, I wondered if I had been a fool my entire life. My confidence was shattered, and the weight of humiliation pressed down like a stone in my chest. Even small things like passing by her at a cafe, with Michael laughing at something private felt like salt on an open wound. I realized that loyalty, hard work, and sacrifice didn't protect me from manipulation. The woman I loved didn't see me as a partner. She saw me as someone to shape, bend, and discard when convenient. I felt completely alone, doubting my judgment, my worth, and even my capacity to trust. That night, staring at the ceiling, the knot in my stomach twisted tighter than ever. I felt as if my world had collapsed, not just my relationship, but the version of myself I had worked so hard to be. Every ounce of pride, effort, and devotion seemed meaningless. And yet, somewhere deep down, a quiet ember of resolve sparked a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could turn this betrayal into something I controlled. After the initial shock faded, a strange clarity began to take shape. I realized that staying angry or heartbroken wouldn't fix anything. I needed control, a way to reclaim my dignity and flip the power dynamic. I started observing Michael more closely, not with malice, but strategically, noticing how he operated, what he valued, and how Chloe's attention toward him made her vulnerable. I began thinking like a chess player. Every move she made, every flirt, every subtle manipulation was a piece I could use to my advantage if I stayed patient and smart. I focused on improving myself, but this time on my own terms, sharpening my skills, boosting confidence, and cultivating a presence that couldn't be ignored. Chloe, of course, remained unaware. She continued, expecting me to grovel, to level up according to her ever-changing standards, oblivious to the quiet storm brewing beneath my calm. I started connecting with Michael in professional contexts, finding genuine common ground, building rapport, and gaining respect for my skills and insights. Every interaction was careful, calculated, but authentic, something Chloe could never anticipate. I noticed her tension when she saw us collaborating effectively, a subtle shift in her demeanor that both validated my strategy and fueled my resolve. I began imagining the ultimate reversal, a scenario where Chloe would realize she no longer had power over me, where my self-worth and independence would be undeniable, and where her manipulations would backfire publicly. It wasn't about revenge in a petty sense. It was about reclaiming control and proving to myself that loyalty, intelligence, and strategy mattered more than blind devotion. I could see the pieces falling into place, and for the first time since the betrayal, I felt empowered, alive, and in command. That night, lying in bed, I didn't feel the suffocating heaviness that had plagued me. Instead, I felt a spark of anticipation. Something was about to change, and this time, it would be on my terms, not hers. Over the next few weeks, I started executing my plan with quiet precision. Every interaction with Michael was professional, deliberate, and most importantly, memorable. I shared ideas, offered solutions, and subtly showcased the skills and confidence Chloe had always told me I lacked. She remained blissfully unaware of my growing rapport with him, continuing her usual mix of charm and manipulation while expecting me to fall in line. The funny thing was, every time Michael acknowledged my input, I could see Chloe's tension spike, just slightly tiny cracks in the perfect image she'd cultivated. I took note of everything. The way she glanced at me when I laughed at one of Michael's jokes, the subtle way she monitored our conversations, and the occasional flicker of jealousy that betrayed her calm facade. At first, I felt guilty about enjoying these little victories, but I quickly realized this wasn't about cruelty. This was about reclaiming the power she had stolen from me and proving that my worth wasn't determined by her approval. I was finally living on my own terms, and it felt intoxicating. Even in social settings, I maintained control. I noticed colleagues starting to pay attention to me in ways they hadn't before, listening when I spoke, asking for input, and respecting my perspective. Chloe, meanwhile, tried to insert herself between interactions, her charm faltering under the weight of my quiet confidence. I could sense her frustration building, though she masked it with practiced smiles and playful jabs at home. I started reflecting on the betrayal, not with pain, but with clarity. Chloe's manipulations had exposed weaknesses in her character, but they had also forced me to sharpen mine. I felt a shift to transformation from someone desperate to prove himself into someone capable of commanding respect naturally. And just as the tension between us began to crack, I realized the real game was about to begin. Something had changed in the balance of power, and Chloe was about to see it. Whether she was ready or not, Chloe started noticing the change, though she wouldn't admit it to anyone, least of all me. Her usual playful jabs and backhanded compliments began to falter whenever Michael or I were in the same room. I could see the subtle frustration in her eyes, the quick adjustments of her posture, the forced smiles that no longer reached her gaze. She tried to regain control by increasing her demands, guilt-tripping me about my lack of focus, or teasing me about not meeting her impossible standards. But I no longer reacted the way I used to. Each attempt she made only emphasized how much I had changed. I was no longer the anxious, eager-to-please man she could manipulate at will. Meanwhile, Michael's presence became increasingly significant. Our rapport grew naturally, conversations flowing with an ease. He noticed my intelligence, my drive, and my calm confidence, the same qualities Chloe had overlooked or undermined. Slowly, a mutual respect and attraction started to build, subtle but undeniable. I caught glimpses of his glances when Chloe wasn't looking, and I felt a quiet thrill knowing that her perfect little web was unraveling. I also started noticing Chloe's small missteps, slips in her tone, moments where she accidentally let her annoyance show, and her attempts to subtly undermine me falling flat. People around us began to pick up on her tension without realizing why, and I quietly enjoyed the small victories of restored control. I felt empowered, not by revenge, but by finally seeing the truth. Loyalty, effort, and strategy matter far more than blind devotion. At night, I'd replay our interactions, analyzing her behavior and my responses. The shift in power was undeniable, and I realized I wasn't just reclaiming respect, I was positioning myself for the ultimate payoff. Chloe had no idea how far this was about to go, and I could feel the tension in the air growing heavier by the day. The night of the big event, I knew it was time to make my move. Chloe had been flaunting her influence and charm all evening, expecting me to nervously orbit around her like I used to. Instead, I walked in with confidence, fully aware of the subtle power shift I'd orchestrated over the past weeks. Michael was by my side, and the way people's attention naturally gravitated toward us was intoxicating. Chloe noticed immediately, her smile faltering for the briefest of seconds before she plastered it back on. She tried to draw me into her orbit, making jokes, dropping hints, trying to assert control. But I remained calm, collected, untouchable. I casually introduced Michael as a close collaborator, dropping small compliments about his skills and intelligence that made the room take notice. Chloe stiffened at the subtle gesture. realizing in that instant that I was no longer her subordinate or the man she could manipulate at will. Guests whispered, glanced at us, and the social balance she'd relied on for so long started tipping in my favor. She tried to laugh it off, but her usual charm couldn't mask the tension brewing beneath the surface. Every glance, every laugh, every gesture I made reinforced that I was finally in control. For the first time in months, I felt the thrill of empowerment. Chloe's attempts at manipulation now seemed almost desperate, her composure cracking under the weight of subtle public scrutiny. I didn't have to say a word to expose her anxiety. Her tiny slips, her failed attempts at dominance were enough. It was vindication, not through humiliation, but through a quiet demonstration of confidence, competence, and independence. As the night wore on, I could see Chloe shrinking in her own spotlight. While Michael and I moved effortlessly, earning attention and respect on our own terms, I felt a sense of satisfaction unlike anything I'd experienced since the betrayal finally. The loyalty, effort, and patience I'd invested in myself were paying off. And in that moment, I realized the game had completely changed, and Chloe had no idea how powerless she had become. The days after that night were a strange mix of tension and revelation. Chloe tried to regain her footing, attempting to reassert control with passive-aggressive comments, sudden coldness, and forced smiles, but it was too late. Friends, colleagues, and even some of her family started noticing the cracks in her carefully curated persona. Her social circle, once unquestioning, began whispering and questioning her integrity. Michael, meanwhile, had become not only a professional ally, but also a silent pillar of support for me. His respect and quiet admiration were obvious to everyone around us. Chloe's attempts to manipulate the narrative fell flat. Leaving her increasingly isolated and frustrated, I could see the frustration and panic in her eyes when she realized that no matter what she did, she couldn't reclaim the control she once held. Every attempt at sabotage, whether through sly remarks or sudden charm offensives, was met with calm confidence on my part. I didn't have to confront her directly. Her own actions, and the social proof of Michael and my presence, spoke louder than words. Guests and colleagues began subtly questioning her motives, noticing how her flattery often hid manipulation. Even her family seemed uncomfortable, forced to acknowledge behavior they had previously ignored. For the first time, I felt truly untouchable in the situation. Chloe's power over me, the control she had exercised for months, had evaporated entirely. And yet, I maintained composure. I wasn't there to humiliate her, but to quietly demonstrate that betrayal and manipulation have consequences. The irony was satisfying. She had spent so long trying to level me up, only to see me surpass her expectations without her input or approval. As I watched her unravel in silence, that justice didn't always require confrontation. Sometimes, the best payoff was allowing truth, patience, and strategic awareness to reveal itself naturally. And as Chloe's smile faltered for the umpteenth time in public, I felt a sense of closure building. But the final act was still ahead. I ended things with Chloe quietly but firmly. I didn't need a dramatic confrontation or a public scene. She already knew she had lost. I set boundaries, cut off unnecessary contact, and focused on rebuilding my life around people who respected me, valued me, and treated me with honesty. Michael and I naturally grew closer, not through manipulation, but through shared values, mutual respect, and genuine connection. I realized that loyalty, patience, and strategic awareness could reclaim dignity far more effectively than blind devotion ever could. Reflecting on everything, I saw the patterns I'd ignored before: subtle manipulation, shifting expectations, and the way emotional leverage can make someone question their worth. I also saw how I had allowed myself to accept unfair treatment out of love and fear of loss. Now, I understood the importance of self-respect, boundaries, and prioritizing relationships that uplift rather than diminish. The betrayal, once a crushing weight, had become a catalyst for transformation, with confidence while the other person remains trapped in their own patterns. Chloe's arrogance and manipulations had been exposed without me needing to stoop to cruelty, and I felt liberated in a way I never imagined. My life felt lighter, freer, and full of possibilities that weren't defined by someone else's approval. The best part? I'd learned that empowerment isn't just revenge, it's reclaiming control, dignity, and self-worth, and letting actions speak louder than words. As I moved forward, I felt stronger, smarter, and more confident than I ever had. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this wasn't just an ending, it was a fresh start, one built on loyalty to myself, honesty, and relationships that truly mattered. I smiled, finally, at peace, knowing that some betrayals aren't just painful, they're the beginning of something better.